Virginity was a precious commodity on the marriage market in the early modern era, and it continues to be in some cultures today. Female virginity was of utmost importance in the Middle Ages. If a bride went to her marriage bed having already engaged in illicit intercourse with anyone but her husband, she would be considered as a whore and would likely be treated as an outcast by her family and friends. But why was this? What was the law on so-called false virgins? And to what extent would women go to restore it? Throughout history and even in many cultures today, a bride was expected to go to her wedding bed as a virgin. It was believed that once she had engaged in intercourse with a man, she automatically became his property. It seems outdated now, but in the Middle Ages this view was widely accepted. A woman's life was defined by men. Until her wedding day, a young woman was the property of her father, hence the tradition of fathers walking their daughters down the aisle to give her away. Upon her marriage to a man, she automatically became his to command. But you may wonder just how far women went to restore their virginity. Well, let's find out. Welcome to History Rediscovered. In this episode, we discuss the disturbing art of faking virginity throughout history. The idea of virginity has shaped cultures in complex ways and had a significant impact on people's lives. The origins of this concept can be found in some of the oldest civilizations that we are aware of. It would be impossible to discuss the subject without mentioning ancient Egypt, a culture that valued virginity and purity from about 3100 AD. Ancient Greece, a society that flourished in the year of the Lord in the 8th century, is where the discourse of virginity truly developed. In this context, young ladies frequently wore a cloth over their attire as an emblem of their untouched status, a fascinating item of historical dressing etiquette. The word virgin is derived from the Greek and Latin word virgo, which means maiden or an unmarried girl or woman. One definition of virginity from the Oxford English Dictionary is the condition of being or remaining in a state of chastity or abstinence from or avoidance of all sexual relations. Virginity is something to lose, or something that is taken by another, which was established in the late 14th century. At this point, virginity started to be strongly linked to both social dignity and spiritual strength. The Eternal Virgin, a symbol of wisdom and combat, was honored by the city of Athens, which was named after the goddess Athena. Male gods are usually connected with mastery characteristics. Not merely a personal characteristic, Athena's virginity represented her principles of independence and self-sufficiency, which influenced the Greek conception of a strong woman. Artemis, another goddess frequently linked to virginity, was worshipped throughout Greece in the city of Ephesus. Unlike Athena, however, Artemis's virginity symbolized the freedom of the wilderness and the hunt, creating a distinct, although no less powerful image of feminine strength. Greek society held high, nearly impossible, standards to meet for women. The ideal woman was beautiful, had a beautiful voice, was sexy, intelligent, tall, industrious, well-born, fertile, virtuous, modest, passive, submissive, silent, and invisible. Women were nurtured into becoming these perfect versions by serving Artemis, the goddess of chastity, the hunt, and the moon, Morford 210, between the ages of 5 and puberty, where they would act out the role of untamed animals that would be domesticated and socialized through marriage, Morford 180. A girl would be married at 14 or 15 to a 30-year-old man who would have many more years of experience in every aspect of the world. At the wedding, she would be passed from the protection of her father to her new husband. The essence of Athenian law ensured that at no point in her life does a woman have any authority over her own being. Part of this is due to the fact that women were considered to be incapable of restraining their insatiable sexual appetites and sensuality, which were believed to subvert men, her family, and society. a woman was believed to be unable to control herself or resist influences like emotions which were believed to be an external force. Rome, which rose to prominence in the year of the Lord in 753, had social structures that emphasized the importance of virginity. The priestesses of the Roman goddess Vesta, known as Vestal Virgins, were in charge of guarding the temple of the sacred fire in Vestas. They were only allowed to perform this duty if they violated their vow of chastity. The harsh penalty of being buried alive was evidence of how seriously the Romans took this obligation. Meanwhile, virginity had symbolic meaning in marriage ceremonies in ancient China as early as 2070, the year of the Lord. An intricate courting and marriage ritual from the Zhou dynasty, the 3 letters and 6 etiquettes placed a great deal of emphasis on the virginity of the bride, which was reflected in the color red, which is frequently used in traditional wedding dress as a symbol of joy and fertility. In these communities, virginity was not only a family or personal issue, rather it was a socio-political construct that was interwoven with their myths, customs, and traditions. Virginity was interpreted and practiced differently in each civilization, but they were all united by a respect for chastity and purity shown in rituals, attire, social mores, and divine representations of purity. Examining ancient diabolical virginity rituals. Virginity rites. Let's start our adventure in Babylon, which dates back to the year of the Lord in 1894 and is among the oldest cities in the world. In this case, the annual sacred marriage ritual was performed by the high priestess, who represented the city's ruler, who represented the god Dumuzi, was reunited with the goddess Inanna in a symbolic courtship. This ceremony emphasized the value of the priestess's virginity, reaffirming both the divine holiness of their union and social conventions. As we move northeast, we reach medieval Europe during this time, when virginity was highly valued and put to the test. The cloth test, which is used in a number of European nations, is an intriguing example. This custom, which dates back to the 5th century, involved covering a married pair with a cloth on their first night of romance. The next morning, the cloth, which was supposed to be stained with blood, was publicly inspected as evidence of the bride's virginity. Meanwhile, Japan's distinctive virginity rites emerged during the Heian period, 794 to 1185. Prior to marriage, aristocratic women would undergo a treatment that would cause their teeth to turn black. Known as ohaguro, this procedure metaphorically symbolized the journey from maidenhood to womanhood on the western shores of Africa in the Yoruba kingdom, even though it was largely a beauty standard. Rituals for verifying virginity were deeply symbolic. The bride was handed a white cloth during the wedding ceremony, and the groom was requested to examine it. If there were bloodstains on the fabric the morning following their first night together, it represented the bride's purity and was widely commemorated in ancient Mayan culture worldwide. After the first night, there was an odd tradition where the girl's mother would check her bedsheet. The lack of bloodstains was interpreted as a terrible omen for her union, bringing shame to the family. A biblical perspective on virginity. The Bible, a powerful work that dates back to the 15th century, has shaped attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors down the ages by weaving tales of virginity into people's hearts and minds. Mary, a modest maiden from the village of Nazareth who is revered in Christianity as the mother of Jesus Christ, is one of the most prominent individuals shedding light on this biblical obsession with virginity. According to Luke's Gospel, the angel Gabriel told her that she would become pregnant while still virgin, a divine conception that raised the purity of virginity to celestial heights. This story, which is frequently told around Christmas, has a profound impact on Christian cultures and reinforces the idea that virginity is a sign of moral superiority and purity, just like in the Old Testament. held great significance in marriage. For example, the Book of Deuteronomy outlined certain regulations pertaining to a bride's chastity. It says that the girl will be taken to her father's house and stoned to death by the men of her community if there is no evidence of her virginity. The harsh repercussions associated with virginity in biblical times are highlighted in this stark text from Deuteronomy 22, which reflects the customs and social mores of the time. The idea of virginity was also shaped by stories about other virgin figures. In society, 10 maidens are described in Matthew's story of the 10 virgins. 5 of them, referred to as wise, carried extra oil for their lamps, while the other 5, referred to as foolish, did not, in anticipation of a bridegroom who represented the second coming of Christ. Only the ready maidens were able to greet the bridegroom when he arrived at midnight, leaving the others in the dark. In this context, virginity symbolized spiritual readiness and knowledge in addition to physical bravery. The tale of Joshua's daughter in the Book of Judges offers an alternative viewpoint on the importance of virginity. After a successful fight, the warrior Jephthah swears to sacrifice his daughter, the first person he sees. He is met by the virgin, and he honors his promise by allowing her to wander the mountains for 2 months in order to lament her virginity. The tragedy of a life without marriage, courting, and children is reflected in this episode, strengthening the social norm that virgin maidens should marry and have children in ancient Corinth, a thriving Greek city-state. In his New Testament letters, the Apostle Paul emphasized the importance of virginity. A virgin or unmarried woman is concerned with the affairs of the Lord. Her goal is to be devoted to the Lord in both body and spirit, he stated. The cultural view of virginity was further shaped by this scriptural instruction, which identified it as a route to chaste chessboards of spiritual dedication, virginity in the Middle Ages. The function of virginity moves from the spiritual and theological realms into the concrete realm of politics and power as we enter the Middle Ages, which lasted from the 5th to the 15th century. In this case, the idea of virginity becomes a valuable resource, a symbol on the enormous chessboard of power relationships and societal alliances. Feudalism, a hierarchical structure where authority was concentrated among a chosen few, emerged during the Middle Ages. As a bride's virginity took center stage as a sign of her honor and the prestige of her family frequently tipped the scales in negotiations, a few nobles in this complex socio-political web marriage made calculated movements intended for power consolidation, territorial gain, and lineage continuity. Alliances in marriage. Eleanor of Aquitaine's marriage to Louis VI of France in 1137 is one example. The promise of the enormous Aquitaine was given to the French crown by Eleanor, one of the richest and most influential women in Western Europe. Her virginity, a highly valued quality, was leveraged to secure this favorable match, altering Europe's geopolitical environment. During the Middle Ages, the cult of virgin saints flourished as well, with popular figures such as Saint Agnes, who represented virginity, and Saint Cecilia, who was the patroness of music. The stories of these venerated virgin saints, which were frequently told in homilies, furthered the idea that virginity was associated with spiritual excellence. In the literary world, divine favor and martyrdom too. In medieval literature, the idea of courtly love was exalted by virginity. Frequently show knights going on dangerous missions to gain the affection of a noble and unreachable virgin woman. This literary genre, which included well-known works like Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales and Sir Thomas Malory's La Morte d'Arthur, shaped cultural attitudes toward love and romance by reinforcing the veneration of virginity. The hidden art of using age to pretend to be pure. The idea of virginity has been entwined with many strands of social standards and expectations throughout the millennia of human history through the invisible art of pretending to be pure. The frequently hidden side of this debate is revealed by unraveling these complex patterns. One of the oldest examples of this activity dates back to Rome during 27 BC/476 AD and is the art of pretending to be a virgin. Roman women were supposed to be virgins when they married, and this was a socially enforced norm. In his work Attic, the Roman author and philosopher Alice Gallius recorded an intriguing story, nights of how a woman named Marcia might have created the appearance of virginity by contracting her female reproductive system using an aloe vera extract. Around 500 to 1500 AD, as we sail through time, we arrive at the European coastlines of the Middle Ages. During this time, ladies of the night who wanted to mimic purity often used a mixture called Saint Hildegard's Dew, which was named after the well-known abbess Hildegard of Bingen. Known for its ability to restrict the female reproductive system, this potion was a mixture of pennyroyal and fennel garden rocket. In 18th century France, blood was also used to create the appearance of virginity. According to a well-known quotation credited to French author Madame de Sévigné, women used chicken blood for this. But it's crucial to realize that this practice existed in societies all over Asia and wasn't just in the West. Variations of this technique have been documented historically from China to India. In this delicate ballet of deception, clandestine artifacts also had a role. The idea of artificial heme has been documented in a number of cultures, with examples found in Asia and the Middle East. These often entail the use of fragile membranes that, when broken, replicate the bleeding that is sometimes misidentified as a woman's first courtship experience. These customs have changed into medical operations, like hymenoplasty in more recent times, due to the development of modern medicine. Providing a more accurate way to mimic virginity, the late 20th century saw the rise in popularity of this surgical technique, which reconstructs the hymen. It's crucial to remember that these operations are not without their ethical and medical issues. Although fascinating, the popular habit of imitating virginity is a powerful illustration of the intense strain and scrutiny women have endured regarding their purity. Joan of Arc. From ancient Rome to the present, women have used their capacity to pretend to be virgins as a weapon to get around cultures that place an excessive amount of value on their purity. Arc's Joan, born in the tiny northeastern French village of Domremy in 1412, Joan of Arc is known as the pure lily amidst the flames. A symbol of bravery, conviction, and heavenly quiddance, Joan of Arc is affectionately referred to as Elle Pucelle, or the Maid. Her tale is a remarkable tale in which her virginity is interpreted as a sign of divine approval and moral excellence. When Joan was just 13 years old, during the chaos of the 100 Years' War, she started seeing visions of saints, Michael, Catherine, and Margaret, who she felt had given her the sacred task of standing by Charles VI and rescuing France from English rule. Because of how strong her conviction was, she was able to get a meeting with the disinherited French Dauphin, Charles VII, at his court in Chinon in 1429. Attracted by Joan's unwavering faith and heavenly assertions, Charles had her vetted by a team of theologians and physicians who verified her physical and mental health and, more importantly, her virginity, so confirming the legitimacy of her divine mission. La Pucelle's virginity, a kind of supernatural endorsement, if you will, became an integral part of her identity. She gained a certain sanctity and moral authority as a result, which helped her recruit allies and mobilize troops. Only someone so pure, it was thought, could have been selected for such a holy task. She was able to change the course of the war in favor of France by leading the French army to a historic victory at Orléans in May 1429 thanks to this vision. However, Joan's fame also made her a target for the Burgundians, who seized her in 1430. After being given to the English, Pierre Cocher, a bishop who supported the English cause, presided over her trial when her virginity once again took center stage. Joan supported her in spite of harsh interrogation and cruel circumstances. Unshakable faith. Interestingly, Joan's need to maintain her chastity still influenced her fashion choices at this point. Wearing male clothing is a choice. It was a practical step to prevent attack while in custody, and eventually turned into one of the charges against her. She was known to assert that she was more of a woman's assault than a soldier's pants, highlighting her will to remain pure and, unfortunately, serving as a symbol of her moral integrity and heavenly connection. Joan was only 19 years old when she was burnt at the stake in Rome in 1431 after being labeled a heretic, despite her bravery and charm. Only 25 years later, Joan was proclaimed a martyr and the sentence was reversed posthumously. Joan's virginity, a crucial aspect of her sainthood, was not recognized until 1920, solidifying her position as a symbol of divine virtue and moral excellence. The cost of Elizabeth I's virginity. The daughter of King Henry VIII and his second wife Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth I, the unmarried ruler of strength and purity, was born at Greenwich, London, in 1533, according to a royal proclamation. The world had no idea at the time that this baby would go on to become one of the most powerful kings in history. Unlike other women of her era, the first Virgin Queen, Elizabeth, was educated like a prince when she was a young princess. She received tutoring from academics in languages, mathematics, and the classics, which gave her a solid grounding in politics and statecraft that would serve her well during her rule. Even though her early years were tainted by scandal and grief over her mother's execution and her father's disdain, they still equipped her for the career she was meant to follow. Following the death of her half-sister Queen Mary in 1558, Elizabeth took the kingdom at the age of 25. She inherited her first kingdom, which was rife with economic, religious, and political turmoil. Elizabeth was able to establish the Elizabethan era, a time of stability and prosperity, by combining her intelligence, might, and the clever use of her virgin status. In a time when it was expected of women to get married and start a family, Elizabeth chose to remain single for both personal and political reasons. She made good use of her unmarried position. She chose to remain the Virgin Queen, linking the well-being of her kingdom to her unmarried state, because she was well aware that marriage, particularly to a foreign prince, could mean the loss of England's independence and her authority as a monarch. She famously asserted her independence and power when she said, "I will have but one mistress here and no master." Several aristocratic suitors courted Elizabeth as a result of her decision, all vying for her hand in marriage and rule of England. Skillfully handled these proposals, avoiding diplomatic snags and putting her admirers at bay. She would frequently participate in protracted courtship rites, but never accept a proposal of marriage. Elizabeth was able to retain ties and strengthen her reputation as a chaste and devoted monarch who was only committed to her realm through these courtships. The meaning of Elizabeth's virginity changed during her 44-year reign, becoming a tactical weapon in her diplomatic toolbox and a symbol of England's power and independence. Poets and painters began to compare her, and a cult-like adoration developed around her. The Siege of Mons portrait, in which Elizabeth is depicted with an ERM at her feet, a symbol of purity and virginity, is one of the most well-known representations of Austria, the virgin goddess of innocence and purity, and Cynthia, the moon goddess, which emphasized her innocence and divine right to rule. She is shown as a model of virtue, and her unmarried state is a potent symbol of her reign and the path to purity, as indicated by the Latin text Elizabeth the Virgin Queen, the undefiled lily among thorns. In Renaissance Europe, chastity belts and false notions of virginity. Renaissance Europe's chastity belts and illusions of virginity transport us back to this era, which was celebrated for its intellectual, artistic, and cultural achievements. Contrary to popular opinion, chastity belts are shown as iron girdles that are locked, bringing to light a lesser-known aspect of the time period: the mysterious realm of chastity belts and the theatrical performance of purity music. In everyday life, they weren't a constant fixture around the waist. Although it's possible that such devices existed, their uncomfortable and unhygienic nature made their actual use extremely impractical. During the Renaissance, chastity belts were more likely to be found in the vivid imaginations of poets and playwrights than in the wardrobes of Renaissance ladies. They were more simple than substance, frequently serving as comedic devices in plays or as metaphors in moralizing tales. Although the existence of chastity belts may be mostly a myth, attempts to falsify virginity did occur during this time, due in large part to the high societal and economic value placed on a woman's purity. In fact, many of the authentic chastity belts on display in museums today have been shown to be Victorian forgeries designed to titillate the audience with the perceived prudishness and eccentricities of the past. Some women used questionable means to demonstrate their virginity, since in the Renaissance, a woman's purity was determined by her dowry, virtue, and social status. One such method involved using the blood of a capon, a type of rooster, which a prospective bride would hide in her bridal bed so that the next morning it would seem as if the hymen had been severed. Although this is a gruesome procedure, it demonstrates the pressure women in that era were under to seem pure. They were also apothecaries, the pharmacists of the day who marketed treatments to tighten the female reproductive system and make a virgin appear. These concoctions often included vinegar, herbs, and other ingredients. Some even recommended alum, a strong astringent salt, but this was not without danger. Above all, however, these activities underscore the unequal power dynamics of the time when women were subject to social standards. According to the famous Italian writer Niccolò Machiavelli, and standards that frequently left them in vulnerable positions, leading to these desperate measures to maintain their perceived purity in the swirl of Renaissance intrigue. The Mandrake's description of marriage as a besieged castle, in which those on the outside want to enter and those on the inside want to leave, rings true. These words seem appropriate because they convey the contradictory circumstances of women who were torn between their own desires and aspirations, which imposed purity and the expectations of society regarding purity. Virginity during the Victorian era. As the sands of time rolled into the 19th century, Victorian ideals and the value placed on virginity caused a shroud of prudishness to descend upon Britain. Named for Queen Victoria, who ruled from 1837 to 1901, the Victorian era was characterized by a society enshrouded in a rigid moral code that elevated the virtues of virginity and purity to previously unheard-of heights. Losing one's virginity outside of the sacred bonds of marriage was equivalent to societal destruction, and a woman's purity served as the yardstick for her reputation. The most private human relationships were closely monitored and discouraged during this time of courtship and chaperones. Any breach of decorum, from passionate letters to unseemly conduct, was under scrutiny. There are instances plenty to illustrate this societal obsession with virginity. The Agnus Dei, or Lamb of God, was a symbolic device employed by many Victorian novelists, including Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy. It served as a metaphorical representation of innocence and purity, often depicting female characters who epitomized the ideal of virginity. Take, for instance, Hardy's Test of the d'Urbervilles. In this poignant tale, the protagonist Tess is portrayed as a pure woman. Her innocence is tragically manipulated by the villainous Alec d'Urberville. The effects on society test expressions following her loss of virginity eloquently capture the harsh attitudes of the Victorian age regarding this matter. In addition to literature, Victorian social mores permeated science, resulting in questionable hypotheses. According to the unfamiliar two-sphere theory advanced by Victorian physicians such as Dr. William Acton, women were naturally inert and had no bodily urges. Any departure from this standard was pathologized, frequently resulting in severe medical interventions or other extreme measures. Nonetheless, there was a glimmer of rebellion amid this environment of persecution. Women like Josephine Butler led the social purity movement, which aimed to question accepted social mores. In an effort to shield ladies of the night from exploitation, Butler famously fought against the Infectious Illnesses Act legislation that unfairly singled them out. Florence Nightingale, a trailblazer in modern nursing and another prominent figure from this era, chose to focus on her career in healthcare rather than marrying. She famously stated, "I have an intellectual nature that requires satisfaction, and that would find it in him," in a letter to her sister. He was referring to her line of work here. The groundwork for future reform was laid by voices such as Butler and Nightingale, who by the end of the 19th century started to question the Victorian preoccupation with virginity and purity. The moral rules of the time would continue to have an impact well into the 20th century, thus transformation would be a difficult process. Virginity. The scientific facts and persistent myths. The intricate story of virginity is a tangle of scientific facts and persistent beliefs that are revealed within the maze of social conventions and science. The weaved strands of misinformation have distorted this story, particularly with regard to the female body, giving rise to false beliefs like the hymen myth. This notion falsely claims that a woman's hymen's integrity is a reliable sign of her virginity. The hymen, a tiny membrane that partially covers the entrance to the female reproductive system, was originally recognized by the ancient Greeks and has since become the focal point of virginity verification in many cultures. However, the main idea of this myth is that the hymen bleeds and tears during the first. There is no scientific basis for a courtship instance. The great variety in hymen forms and sizes has been highlighted by scientific studies as the one carried out by Dr. Sarah Patterson Brown in 1998, demonstrating that its physical characteristics and look cannot be used as a trustworthy indicator of virginity. Some ladies don't even have one at birth. However, this idea had a sneaky hold on popular beliefs. This erroneous theory served as the foundation for the notorious virginity tests, which thrived as a perverted cultural practice across the globe. As a terrifying example of how deeply ingrained the hymen myth had become in society, the famous French physician Ambroise Paré recounted in his works about conducting a virginity test on a woman at her husband's request in 1552. This myth not only crossed cultural boundaries, but also historical periods, becoming a well-known character in the medical community of the 19th century. Dr. William Acton, a physician from the Victorian era, perpetuated the idea that the hymen is a sign of virginity through his research on the reproductive organs' abnormalities and functions. In spite of these persistent misunderstandings, the winds of change arrived in the 20th century. The hymen myth was disproved by visionaries like public health champion Dr. Mary Calderon. The medical community was guided toward a more accurate view of virginity by Calderon's seminal 1968 work, which challenged the outdated ideas by examining changes in the female reproductive system and continuity from the perspective of the hymen. Unfortunately, the myth persisted despite scientific certainty. Reflecting the persistent societal obsession with gender, the World Health Organization released guidelines in 2019 that explicitly opposed virginity testing. However, the need for such a directive in the 21st century shows how dangerously persistent these myths are. Inside the dichotomy's depths. When the spectre of war swept over the globe in the early 20th century, it fundamentally altered how society constructed and saw femininity, especially in relation to ideas of morality and virginity. An uncomfortable duality developed during this turbulent time, as women were either described as paragons of purity or stark opposites of the virgins. This polarization was made worse by the so-called ladies of the night, the world wars, and especially World War II. Women were romanticized as pure patriotic individuals who took on jobs often performed by men while maintaining their purity and taking care of the home front. During this time, pious virgin women were frequently portrayed on propaganda posters, personifying strength, innocence, and patriotism. The well-known "We Can Do It" poster with Rosie the Riveter, a representation of women's strength and moral rectitude, is one such example. The representation of ladies of the night, who are frequently viewed as the sad victims of the brutal reality of war, stood in stark contrast to this ideal. However, their tales were frequently enmeshed in intricate tales of sacrifice, tenacity, and survival. The terrible saga of the Comfort Women is a disturbing yet important aspect of this story. A euphemistic name used to describe young ladies, mostly from China and Korea, who were forced to console Japanese soldiers during World War I. It is tragic to hear the tale of these ladies who were coerced into these positions under false pretenses of manufacturing jobs or necessary work requirements. A courageous Korean lady named Kim Hak soon first told the wider world about the Comfort Women scheme in 1991. By sharing her horrific experiences, she brought these war crimes to the attention of the world. At about the same period, women who were observed courting German soldiers during the German occupation of France were referred to by the French as horizontal collaborators. The duality that pervaded the war was further highlighted when these ladies were later publicly humiliated in post-liberation France. The contrast was accentuated by the way these women were treated following the war. While the horizontal collaborators faced public disdain and exclusion, many Comfort Women came home with the burden of shame and quiet. These social responses stood in sharp contrast to the joyous reception given to their virginal counterparts, who had followed custom, were hailed as patriotic heroes. Simone de Beauvoir's work, which emphasizes the war, poignantly captures this paradox by stating that humanity is masculine and that man defines woman not in herself, but in relation to himself. As we conclude this moving journey, we see the perpetuation of male-centric social norms in this era when women are either valued or despised according to their perceived conformity to the ideals of purity. From Roman extracts of aloe vera to St. Hildegard's enigmatic dew, from the clever use of chicken blood to the development of contemporary medical techniques, we find ourselves standing at the nexus of human identities and society expectations throughout history. The persistent conversation over virginity is reflected in the chronicles of feigning purity. Although beyond these intriguing stories and characters, what endures is the echo of a strong social pressure that has persisted for centuries, the use of methods to mimic virginity. Their roots are interwoven in a systemic culture that has frequently prized women for their perceived purity more than their individual merit, even as their techniques have evolved. It's time for us to go. But before we do, let's reminisce about the insightful remarks made by feminist icon Gloria Steinem. This strong statement contains a message of independence and individuality, reminding us that virginity and worth are not tied in this endeavor. A liberated woman is one who has relationships before marriage and a job after. That's it for today. What are your views and thoughts on this topic? Comment down below. Remember to support our channel, please subscribe.